Richard White, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks, Sean.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the challenges of customer-facing teams in a fully remote or hybrid environment and what we might be able to do to mitigate those challenges and even turn those challenges into opportunities for our teams. As we get started, I wanted to share Richard's bio with everybody. Richard White is founder and CEO of Fathom.video, a free app that records, transcribes, and highlights your calls so you can focus on the conversation instead of taking notes. I think that's wonderful. I've tried a few of these different types of apps and services before to varying kind of reviews and outcomes. So I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk with you more about really just the background behind that as a tool, but also more broadly, like I said, to talk about these challenges that customer-facing teams are facing in the modern world of work. Richard, anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Sure. Yeah. I'm originally kind of a computer science grad / programmer turned product designer turned, I guess, kind of go-to-market leader. At my last company, I ran the marketing team as well as the sales team for a while. And that's where, I think a lot of what we're doing here at Fathom is the intersection of good design applied to the challenges of people running, like I said, customer-facing teams. I don't think you have a lot of engineers running sales teams. Sometimes to good effect, and sometimes to bad effect on my part when I was doing that. But it was a real eye-opening experience and really there was a lot of insights there that led to what we're doing here at Fathom.
Yeah, well, very cool. So why don't you talk just a little bit more about the kind of the origins of Fathom? Because I'm always fascinated by that. And then we can get more into the broader topic.
Sure. Yeah, we started the company 3 years ago, but really this Fathom started about almost 4 years ago, actually right before the pandemic. I found myself working at my last startup, talking to a lot of customers. I was actually talking to tons of customers. I think I did like first 6 weeks of 2020, I think I did like 100 or 200 like Zoom calls with customers. I was doing research for a new product. And two things really stood out to me. One was, gosh, I really hate taking notes and talking to someone, right? You're on the phone with them. You can't get them back on the phone. You got 20 minutes, you got 30 minutes. You're trying to learn as much as you can in that short period of time, but you're also trying to make sure you don't miss a thing they say, right? So you're like trying to sequence your questions and get to the root causes and stuff like that, hurriedly typing things out. And what I kind of found was two things. One is, I think I'm a pretty good note taker. I would be really diligent on the call. I'd block out 10 minutes after the call to like clean up those notes and make them make sense. But two things I found. One was 3 weeks later, I would look at some of my notes and be like, I don't remember who this was and like what we talked about and the important nuance. And probably the more frustrating part is, the whole point of me talking to all these people was to inform a strategy and present this back to the team. Hey, I talked to these people. Here's what we've learned. And what I found was when you take a bunch of notes and synthesize them down to, here's 3 bullet points or here's 3 takeaways, it lost a lot of the like human emotion that made it credible and authentic. And I presented my team like I had these huge insights. I talked to these 10 customers. Oh my gosh, we learned A, B, and C, and people were just like, okay, right? It was like really fell flat, and I was like, wait, what am I missing here? These were amazing conversations, and so we actually did a quick little prototype where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to record these conversations, but instead of like sharing with you 3 hours of content, because no one wants to watch other people's calls, I'm just going to make my own like highlight reel, like pull out 30-second vignettes from each call that I think are really impactful. I'm going to share that with the team instead at the next kind of like update. And I did that, and the response was so much different, right? It was people were leaning in, people were asking follow-up questions, like, because it's just so much more credible than me just saying there's a few bullet points. And so that was really the start of this idea around Fathom, which is really anyone. I mean, there's been some tooling in the past for these kind of like call recording software, but they were always just really focused at like really high-end sales teams for the most part, or they were really focused on giving you a transcript. And I was going to say, like, I think, really anyone who's on video conferencing meetings has this challenge of taking notes, or if you're a manager, you're someone who's trying to understand the notes, right? When I ran my sales team 2-3 years ago, my biggest challenge was, I was constantly trying to get the team to take good notes. Like, hey, this is too detailed. Hey, this is not detailed enough. But like my own notes, even the best notes, I go back and read them, and I'd always be asked this question. Yeah, but what did that person actually say? How did that pricing discussion actually go? when they describe the problem that they're facing, like what's the nuance of what they said? And so I think we saw from multiple directions, from the direction of someone that's on the call, there's like a huge productivity gain you can unlock by just having some other tool backing you up. So you don't worry about missing a point. You just can have a conversation and know, there's some really great insight I get from talking to John. I can go grab that clip. I can rewatch it, can share it with my boss. And as a manager, you have the also problem, which is you're expected to be omnipotent about what's happening on all your team's meetings, right?
Yeah.
You're expected to be there, whether it's internal or especially if it's external, and you don't have time to listen to all this stuff. Nor do you have anyone, I think, if you had enough time, no one has the like fortitude to listen to hours and hours of people doing calls. One of the interesting stats we find, only about 15% of a video call ever gets highlighted. Right. And so that makes sense. It's like 85% of these meetings are kind of what you expect, kind of rote. It's like 15% of them are actually the really interesting parts that someone else needs to see. And so really we're like, oh, let's go build a tool that helps the ICs on the call be more productive, less stress, and helps the managers find out about that 15% of the call they should be listening to, so that they at least can present themselves as omnipotent as possible.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. And like I said, I've tried some of these before, like the AI note takers, or whatever. And you have the transcripts, like in Zoom, they'll auto-generate transcripts. And what I found is it's fine. It's marginally helpful, but it hasn't necessarily moved the needle. And so what you're describing seems to be a bit different than some of those other tools.
Yeah, I mean, there's three big differences between us and I think a lot of the tools that came before this. A lot of them just like spit out a transcript. We actually spit out some structured notes or an AI summary, but we don't rely on the text. I find that all of the text, whether it's some AI summary or what's a transcript, no one should read the transcript. We use the transcript as a way to get back to the part of the call to watch. I think you really have to watch the primary source. And so we focus more on let's find the highlights and rewatch the 3 minutes of that meeting that really matters, rather than you try to read the transcript, because a lot gets lost even in that. The second thing we do that other ones don't do is we give you instant access to all the stuff after the call. Like Zoom itself even takes like half an hour to get you just the recording and the transcript after the call. We get it to you within 10 seconds. And I think that's super important too, because if you're trying to replace notes, people clean up their notes after the call, right? Or they like do all their actions. They do follow-up emails. They put the stuff in the CRM. And so we thought it was super important to like make sure that thing is super fast from a UX perspective. And then the third big difference is we're completely free for individuals. And so I think a lot of these other tools are charging you a lot of money for a tool that's slow and doesn't really give you the output you want.
Yeah, cool. And one of the things we've been focusing on so far in the conversation is the customer facing piece of this, right? So during the pandemic, everyone had to go remote, and lots of teams who perhaps weren't comfortable in a remote environment with remote collaborations had to try to figure out better approaches. And I imagine this tool could be utilized in any of those types of remote or hybrid types of team collaboration types of environments, but you also focus directly on the customer facing teams. So maybe speak a little bit more to that, in that distinction, even where you're kind of honing in on that niche.
Yeah, that's been our initial kind of focus, has been those external calls with customers. They're I think one of the most limited resources in an org, right? It's like, unlike an internal meeting, if I miss something you said and you're a customer, it's hard for me to get you back on the line, right? Even harder if you're like a prospect, right? So we also see that's also I think the lifeblood of an organization is, what are customers saying about us, right? And the larger your org gets, the less people are actually at the coalface hearing those conversations, right? And so I think we also find that those kind of customer conversations are something that everyone in the org wants to see, whether they're in marketing, whether they're in engineering, whether they're in product. So any of the calls that are happening for your success team, for your sales team, from your implementation team, they want, like, that's the stuff that everyone else in the org wants to get access to. And I think they're also the most high pressure calls too, right? Where it's like trying to ask you to do two things at once. The less we can make the lower we can make the cognitive load on the human doing the conversation, the better, right? And so we'll not only record things, we'll do like in-meeting coaching, right? Letting you know if you monologue or you're talking too much or not enough, and that sort of fun stuff. But yeah, I think the pandemic was interesting because a lot of the ways, if you're a manager, a lot of ways again, remember I mentioned like you are expected to have this kind of omnipotence, And historically, the way you had some of this omnipotence was ambient awareness. You would have a sales floor, you have a success floor, you overhear people saying things, and you could overhear one half the conversation, and that could kind of give you some awareness, like, oh, that's interesting. What question sparked you to go down that thread, right? Or, oh, I don't know that we should explain it this way. Here's probably a better way to explain it. Like, a lot of that was lost. And I think there was a lot of really good, customer facing managers that kind of found themselves without their best tool, which was that ambient awareness of what's happening. And so now we're trying to help people kind of rebuild that ambient awareness with tools like Fathom, where you can say, okay, certain keywords or certain things, I want to be able to audit calls when, I hear they don't go well, or I want to get an automatic alert when certain keywords or certain things are said, or I want to get notified and listen to all the pricing discussions that are happening. So we almost have to rebuild this from first principles of, okay, you're not just going to overhear things. What's going to get more structured and programmatic around what are the parts of the conversation you think are most valuable for you to like review and listen in on?
Yeah. Well, and I even think back to, in another life, this was decades ago, where I'm like sitting in, I'm like a training supervisor at a call center, and I'm listening into calls, right? That's like what I did so much. I'm like listening to calls, I'm taking notes for coaching or mentoring sessions, or to figure out what trainings need to be accomplished. And like you said, nobody wants to sit and listen to calls where the vast majority of it's just kind of rote, kind of repetitive stuff. It's really that smaller chunk where you get to the heart of the interactions, right? So I imagine even in that kind of a setting, like this could be super helpful, because it's going to highlight the most important pieces that are really going to resonate and are going to be important for you to then translate into like coaching conversations and those sorts of things.
Yeah. The ability to just pull out, like, here's 30 seconds call and share it with a colleague or another executive, et cetera. And now we're even getting to the point where we can automatically surface some of these trends across calls. So like we're at the point where I don't need you to listen to individual calls. Here's the top 3 new questions we've heard this week. Go listen to them and brainstorm an answer to your team. So yeah, that's why we focus, I think, mostly on external calls. Having said that, I think the other big impact of kind of the shift to remote work is what I call kind of like meeting inflation on like internal meetings. Sure. Again, it stems from the same like ambient awareness problem. It used to be invite a few people to the meeting. If someone needed to hear some part of that meeting, they'd probably pick it up, at the water cooler or whatnot. Oh, we talked about this. Oh, let me go follow up and figure out what was said. And in a remote culture, that doesn't happen. So now you get people over inviting people to meetings. Oh, like one time we talked about something that Tim should have heard. So now we're inviting Tim to this meeting every single week. And poor Tim never 3 out of 4 times Tim joins this meeting, doesn't say a thing, doesn't need to hear any of this stuff, right? And so that's the kind of the next step we're looking at is we've got a bunch of pilots where we're enabling these larger orgs where we say, look, you're going to record this meeting. We're going to send a summary to everyone that attends, or even the folks that don't attend, right? Anyone who's invited. And so we're going to give people the permission to not join that meeting, instead watch the meeting recap, at 1.5x speed, or like, wait for someone to tell them like, hey, Tim, there was a 5-minute segment you really should hear, right? Oh, great. We can make the decision after the meeting now, not have to preemptively before the meeting invite Tim and add an extra hour of non-productive time to his day. So I think both these things stem from, it's just hard to create ambient awareness in a remote environment. And so we have to kind of rebuild a lot of our collaboration process. Having said that, I think once you do, you actually build a org that's almost more resilient and more efficient than the in-person one, because the ambient stuff was easy and you got it for free by having an office, but I don't think it was always the most effective way to do these things, right?
Well, right. And that's one of the big arguments that leaders are making as they're doing, calls for return to the office, or mandates even for their remote or hybrid workers, is they feel like, well, we just don't know what's going on. We don't have that ambient knowledge of what's happening just through the inner office culture and water cooler conversations and all that kind of casual stuff. And, there are good reasons to be together face to face in an office setting. So I don't want to downplay that. And there could be good strategic reasons for it. But if the general thing is, I just don't know what's going on anymore in this remote environment, and I need to have better kind of knowledge and better even control over what's happening, I think that's not a great reason. I think there are tools that can help us to do that. And there are ways that we can, in a remote or a hybrid environment, help these collaborative opportunities to still occur, even if it's different than what it, when it happened perhaps organically in, an office setting. So I think tools like this, I think, really can play a huge role as we move forward, as we wrestle with and navigate this, face-to-face versus remote or hybrid kind of a context for organizations, and as leaders navigate that too. I mean, as all of these back to work mandates, back to office mandates are happening in various organizations, you see the strain in the tension with workers who've become accustomed to the flexibility of working in at least a hybrid, if not a remote kind of an environment, and really, hesitating, and you see lots of people just choosing to leave because they don't want to go back to that face-to-face environment. And frankly, we're in a really tight labor market, skills gaps. It's not easy to get and retain good people. And so, you have to wrestle with, well, what are the pros of bringing people back to the physical office space? And there can be many, but what are the downsides to that? And one of them is you might not be able to keep that good person or attract the next good person. And so, again, using tools like this to allow you to engage with and monitor, I say monitor in a healthy way, like to just that understanding of what's happening, to be able to have that understanding, using tools like this, I think is going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think our vision is, a world where it's like, actually, you prefer to have the remote meeting. It's actually easier on you and whatnot. And I already live this, because sometimes people ask me, hey, you want to meet up for coffee? And I'm like, we can, but I'd rather not, because if you tell me anything, I'm going to forget 50% of it. Not my action items are going to be really bad. But if you meet with me on Zoom, one, obviously it saves me much time to go in the coffee shop, but I also have this recording of it, right? And I have this whole new muscle memory that makes me a much more productive person when I can do this kind of interaction versus going to the coffee shop, whipping out my notepad and trying to be like, wait, what did you say? And like, losing a lot of the nuance that I would get via video. So I do think it's
that's
possible.
As intentional as we might be when you're meeting with a person, you're trying to be present with them, you're trying to listen, you're trying, like, of course, all those things, we try to do it, we still have terrible memories.
Yeah.
and like you said, even if we're really skilled at taking really great notes, it's still just, it's hard when you're having all these interactions to keep everything straight, and to be able to develop those types of meaningful kind of interactions and relationships with people without tools to help us to reinforce us, right? I feel like I'm a fairly intelligent person, but man, I talk with a lot of people, and I'm just not going to remember it all.
Right. I don't think we were built to have, 5 to 7 calls a day with 5 different people 5 days a week, right? And you think about some of these jobs where it's like I catch up with someone once a month or once a quarter. Gosh, I don't remember. I feel bad. Like they all blur together at some point. And there's something really special that happens when I meet with someone on a video call. I've recorded it, summarized it, or review it, and then meet with them 6 months later. I go back and watch the last couple of minutes of that call, and immediately pops in my brain, I remember exactly where I left off with that person, right? And so that's what this is all about, right? Like, we have enough stressful things in our lives. So like, how do we find ways to make it slightly less stressful?
Well, and I love what you mentioned a few minutes ago too, just about meeting fatigue and like having so many pointless meetings. I don't know about you, but I went to lots of pointless meetings before the pandemic. But once the pandemic happened and like everyone goes remote, all of a sudden I'm getting invited to every stinking meeting, and I'm like in meetings all day long. And that's the pendulum has swung back a bit, but still I'm in way more meetings now than I was before the pandemic. And a lot of them I'm like, do I really need to be here? And if I'm thinking that, I'm sure everyone else is thinking that too. And so the reality is these types of tools can also be heavily utilized to make sure that's not happening, because you can get someone caught up very quickly. They don't have to attend the entire meeting, but they can get that little nugget, the important piece, and then run with it. How much more effective and efficient is that? How much, in terms of just opportunity cost, in terms of time wasting, how much can organizations save from a productivity and efficiency kind of perspective, let alone like just like the soul sucking aspect of like sitting through meetings that demotivates people, and then they're not going to be doing great work. I mean, it seems like just a no-brainer if we can figure out how to utilize these tools for that kind of an approach as well.
Yeah, it can not only be helpful for disseminating information from these meetings so you have less people attend, it also help you figure out who doesn't need to be there, right? We'll track
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
talks, and you'd be like, look, over the last 3 meetings, like I said, Tim's talked only 2% of the time. So maybe Tim doesn't need to be in this meeting, right? I used to have a rule at my last company. I think Amazon's an interesting culture around this as well, but my rule was like meetings are for discussion, not content delivery.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of places. I think the reaction to that loss of ambient awareness for a lot of organizations was the only hammer we have for awareness is meetings. And so everything looked like a nail. And so just great, we're going to proliferate these meetings. And again, there wasn't someone that sat down and said, we're going to have a bunch more meetings. It just happened organically because that was the main lever you had as a manager to disseminate information. And I think now you're starting to see companies look at stuff like this, like Fathom, or also looking at things of like, which of these things don't need to be meetings? Which of these things could be, I'm going to record a presentation and let you watch it asynchronously, or, I'm going to take the time to Amazon style. Amazon has the like before every meeting, big strategic meeting, you have to write a 6-page memo, and everyone sits at the beginning of the meeting and reads the memo, and then they discuss. And so, maybe you create a culture where it's like, oh no, we're going to put more onus on the meeting creator to disseminate stuff asynchronously ahead of time. So I think you're seeing a bunch of different strategies. And I think the answer is all of the above, right? There's no one silver bullet. The good companies are deploying all three of these strategies in different places to, try to get back some of that productivity that was lost when we got this traumatic meeting inflation.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Richard, it has been a real pleasure. I know at the time I'm going to need to let you go here in just a few minutes, but before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team there at Fathom, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Cool. I'm a LinkedIn guy, so feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Richard White on LinkedIn, Fathom. You'll see this bright blue avatar. Looks like a bitmap. Everyone thinks it's an NFT, but we had 8-bit images before NFTs, so calm down. It's not an NFT. So just ping me on LinkedIn. I'll try to hopefully get back to you quickly in between all the recruiter spam I get. I think the last word on this is just that there are a lot of like ways to improve this, right? So I think if you're not experimenting with some tool, either for internal meetings or external meetings, you should be trying something, because I think there's a lot of stuff out there that you can start iterating to a more productive workforce. Obviously, we'd love for you to try Fathom. Again, completely free to use for individuals. We only charge you once you want to roll it out to your entire team, but you can easily pilot Fathom with a handful of folks in your team. They'll love it. They'll be more productive. It's almost my guarantee. I've very rarely seen people that are on customer meetings that don't. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me on, John. This has been great.
I love it. Thank you, Richard. And I'm excited to try Fathom myself. I'm going to go check that out as soon as we're done with this call. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Richard and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have